Welcome back, everybody. This is GDS. Before we start this video, I want you to go to the blah blah below, that's the comments, and let me know what you feel about incorporating the GM's world into the player characters. Do you like it? Do you do it? Do you not like it? Do you not do it? This is a small channel. I don't get many comments, so let me know what you think and let's get a conversation going. I'll see your comment, I'll heart it, I'll respond to it. So this is going to be a hopefully quick video about how, as the players and as a GM, you use the world to make characters. One of the most important things about this is how this should feel. It should feel like a collaborative brainstorm session. So it shouldn't feel like the DM is trying to mandate their world on your character. It also shouldn't feel like the player is just making up whatever it is they want and shoving it into the DM's world. Yeah. So that's how it should feel, but I think first we should ask, and it's worth asking, why do we even want to do this? Why do we want the characters to fit into the GM's world? I think that there are three major reasons. The first one is pretty obvious. It's to maintain verisimilitude. The player is going to play their characters in the DM's world, so you want the character to make sense in the context of that world. In case you don't know, verisimilitude is the appearance of something that's fictional and not real feeling like it's real. So it's easy to see how a character completely out of place in a world would make the world feel not real. Even though it's not real, it's all fiction. You get it. The second reason that we might want to incorporate the character into the GM's world is that we can establish fun and interesting relations between the character and the world that are not only exciting for the player, but also useful for the GM. More on this later. The third reason is that, like I said, this should be a collaborative brainstorm. So in a way, this is world building together, which I have a video about, which you should check out. It's going to be here or here. But world building together is fun. The GMs spent time crafting a world that they think is cool and clever. So they want to be able to reveal some of that world to the players for them to discover and also think that it's cool and clever. And the vice versa is true. Whatever the player makes up, they want to share with the GM. World building together is fun. That's the third point. On to the next part. What do you need to keep in mind if you're the GM and you want to incorporate the player character into the world? The first thing, I think, is to be open-minded. Remember that if you do your job right, you leave space in your world. Places where you haven't world built and you're not sure exactly what's there. If you want to know more about leaving space, the most important thing to do when you're world building, I also have a video about that here or here, I don't know. So part of leaving space, for example, putting a tower on the map and not knowing what that tower is and waiting for either the future you or your players to surprise you with what's there. Doing that requires you to be comfortable with letting players set facts about the world. For example, if you put a tower on the map and you don't know what's there, me as a player might be like, hey, maybe that tower belongs to this faction, and it's a stronghold, and that's where I was born. This is exactly why we leave space. We want to allow our inspired future us or our inspired players to make up cool things and fill in the gaps. So this is an opportunity to flesh out parts of your world that you haven't been able to fill yet. And when you hand that part of the world to players, they'll feel like the world is also theirs now. There'll be a sense of ownership there, and they'll think it's cool and clever in similar ways that you do. The last thing on being open-minded is, I think, to decouple mechanical benefits from story or background benefits. What I mean by this is you don't want players to pick a specific background just because that gives them the most or the best mechanical benefit for their build. You want players to think about their character in a world, which is why sometimes it's useful to decouple the mechanics and the background and to assure them that whatever it is they pick, they'll get a bonus that's good for their build and makes sense. There's sometimes a false dichotomy in the mind of gamers between something that makes sense lore-wise to something that's mechanically beneficial. In that, if you pick something that's mechanically beneficial, it's okay for it to not be good lore-wise. Or if you pick something that's good lore-wise, you shouldn't expect it to be mechanically beneficial. I don't see why that is. The next thing you should keep in mind if you're the GM and you're incorporating the player character into the world is the opposite of being open-minded, which is being sure to keep the world's authenticity. It's one thing to let players fill in gaps that you purposefully left in the world, and it's another thing to let them set something fundamental about the world that you were excited about that has now changed. There's a balance to strike between being open-minded and also making sure that your world feels like your world, what you intended it to be. As soon as you set a rule about the world and communicate it to your players, I guarantee you when players make characters, they will want to break that rule. Players will want their characters to be the exception. For example, if you have no cleric elves in your world for lore reasons, they will want to be the one cleric elf. There's nothing inherently bad about that will. Players want their characters to be special. That's good. But in order to keep your world's authenticity so it feels like a coherent world, instead of doing that, I would identify what kind of fantasy is the player trying to accomplish. What feelings or themes or genres are they trying to fulfill with making the character the way it is? Then what I would do is come up with an alternative solution working with the player that also fulfills the same fantasy while keeping to the authenticity of your world. For example, let's say there are no elf cleric and the player wants to make an elf cleric. I might ask the player, what is it that you find cool about elf clerics? And they will say, well, I think it's really interesting and cool to be the only one of my faction who believes a certain thing. So I might say, well, you can pick whatever class you want, but actually the elf faction in my world has this sub-faction that's kind of mysterious and out of the ordinary. So if you're part of that, I think you'll accomplish the same thing. That's just an example I came up with on the spot. The details will depend on your game. The next thing to keep in mind as a GM, as you're incorporating player characters into the world, is how you're going to use their background in the future of your game. Especially when the character has strong ties to the world. The GM can give them problems that are related to the world that they can't just solve with their character sheets. When players can't solve problems with their spells and weapons and abilities with their character sheets, achieving their objective, whatever it is contingent on their understanding of and interaction with the world. GMs often complain about players not caring about the world. Like we said before, GMs want players to care about their world because they spent time crafting it and they think it's really cool and clever. So they want the players to discover it and also feel cool and clever for discovering it. They also want to share something they think is cool with people they like. Make players care about your world by making it directly relevant to their success, which is a lot easier to do when those characters already have background ties to that world. That said, while this is really useful, you shouldn't feel compelled to always use the character backgrounds. I would say use it in moderation when it feels right rather than all the time. The next and final part of what to do as a GM when you're incorporating the player character into your world is how to portray aspects of your world through the character. The character made by your player might be an important part of your world. For example, if your world was conquered by a dragon phalanx, they might be part of that dragon phalanx. Or if all the forests in the world are carefully maintained by a small group of elves, and your player is one of those elves, that is a way in which your world can be portrayed through that character. When you do this, there are two interesting things you can do. The first one is to collude with players to engineer certain moments. For example, you can say, when you go to this shop, this person really doesn't like the forest elves, so they're going to try to shut you down and throw you out. What I need you to do is stand your ground and demand to be there. The people in the shop will back you up. The reason we might want to engineer that moment is in order to, in the most powerful way, show instead of tell. The biases or ideas or themes in your world feel most real when they affect the players and the characters in their party. Plus, players love colluding with a GM. They love having a little peek behind the screen. Usually when I ask a player to do this, they say absolutely yes. I've never had a player say no, but if they do, that's not a problem. Just say, okay, that's fine. The second thing you can do when you portray your world through the characters is to give each player character information that's biased on the same thing. So for example, if you have a group of paladins in your world that's perhaps controversial, you may give one of your players a little one-page double-spaced lore document where one of the things it lists is this is an evil group of paladins, blah 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 blah. To another player who might have grown up in a place where they like the paladins, it will say these righteous paladins do this, protect, and etc. I think giving each player biased history depending on what their character would grow up to believe and think creates really interesting moments. The key here is to not tell the players that it's biased, because of course their characters wouldn't know. One more thing on portraying the world with characters. Something specifically that I want to say is regarding secret information. Players, especially new ones, love their character having a secret identity or knowing something secret that might not be in the best interests of the party. Here is my only tip on this, because otherwise it's very situation dependent. Secret information in the background should only be used if that information will not remain a secret. Why? Because a secret that remains a secret is not dramatic. A secret that remains a secret never affects the story. So be ready to create secrets that come out. That's everything I have to say on if you're the GM, what do you do? What's to keep in mind, some tips and tricks when you incorporate a player character into your world. Now, what do you do if you're a player? The first thing I would say is be open-minded. Don't come in wanting to recreate a certain character that you really like from a certain TV series or movie. The reason for that is that unless you're playing in the same setting as that original character, it just doesn't work out. I wish I had a more rigorous way to express this, but it just doesn't work. Very specifically, if you try to make your anime OC in my games, I will remind you that the guillotine has not been uninvented. The other thing about being open-minded is that while you are now also an author of the world, you have to be open to the GM's authenticity and version of that world. When you see a rule or a law about the world, don't try to instantly break it, and don't ignore the world either. Work with the GM to understand the world and create an interesting character within its purview. Now, some tips when you actually make your character as the player. Keep in mind the experience level of your character. Make sure to audit what you think it makes sense for them to have accomplished before they became an adventurer or before they joined the party. It does not make sense for your level 3 character to be the world's best assassin and to have defeated 10 dragons. The last tip I have on making a good background is making a background that's useful for you and for the GM. So that background should describe how you went from being whoever you were to becoming an adventurer. That might seem obvious, but I've seen many character backgrounds that really don't touch on that. In order to do that, I have 4 questions for you to answer about your character. 1 is, where were you born? 2, how did your past experience prepare you for adventuring? If you were a poet your entire life, it does not make sense for you to now be a level 3 fighter. 3, why did you leave that life behind for adventuring? Being an adventurer is weird. Going out and slaying monsters and fighting for your life every day for treasure is not a normal job. Why did you leave your normal life to do that? And 4, I understand your character is dark and mysterious and has no parents, and the reason people usually do that is because they don't want their characters to be bogged down by anything in their background. But that's just not interesting and also not probable. So while it is still possible for your character's parents to be dead, I want you to answer the question with at least one item. When you left to become an adventurer, what did you leave behind? This could be family, friends, this could be money, it could be a degree, it could be a certain occupation, it could be reputation. There are many things that your character could have left behind. And that's everything I have on how to incorporate a player character into the world from the GM's perspective and from the player's perspective. If you liked the video, please smash your head into the like and into the subscribe button. If you're not subscribed, I need you to do an odd number of times. Let's go for a high number this time, 27. And also like, regardless of whether or not you subscribed, you must like this video also an odd number of times. Let's do 3. Hit the bell to get notifications. I can't tell you how much this stuff helps me because I honestly don't know. I don't know how the YouTube algorithm works, and I don't think anyone does. But here, it helps. If you made it this far, you should know we have a Discord channel. The link is going to be in the nonsense below. Come join us. Like this YouTube channel, the Discord channel is small, so it's a nice tight-knit community where you can just discuss your ideas, and I'll be there. So I hope you will too. I'll see you later.